We hear these stories about corporate raiders, right? Like, especially back in the 80s. You picture the sleek suits, the high-stakes deals, but like, what was actually happening behind those billion-dollar
It
buyouts?
really was a wild time.
Totally.
Yeah.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into this world, specifically leveraged buyouts and the rise of a firm I'm sure you've heard of, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts.
KKR.
Yeah, exactly, KKR. Everyone on Wall Street knows that name.
You know, what's so interesting about KKR is they really understood the Wall Street of that era, like during the disco era. Their risk tolerance was higher than ever.
Nice. Higher than disco fever, right.
Exactly. It was a different time. This wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was this major fundamental shift in how people viewed risk and reward.
Okay, so let's try to like really unpack this. So imagine for a second, you're, say, Bill Jones, a successful executive. You're running Born Clay Products. It's this brick company down in North Carolina.
Okay.
Things are going pretty well, right?
Oh, okay.
But then suddenly, boom, family feud erupts.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it throws the entire future of the company into jeopardy. Everything this guy, Bill Jones, has worked for, it's all at risk.
That's exactly the kind of vulnerability KKR thrived on. That fear of losing control. That was key to their whole strategy. They'd swoop in, offering executives like Jones a lifeline, a chance to regain control. But it always came with a price.
Debt.
Yep, a mountain of it.
Which, okay, this is where things get even more interesting. Enter Henry Kravis. Dude's already making waves on Wall Street, known for these huge deals. But forget your fancy boardrooms. Forget the power lunches.
Right.
Kravis, he took a different approach. He was out there, like, pressing the flesh, having BBQs with CEOs,
Really down to earth.
Exactly. And he charmed them with this pitch that almost sounded too good to be true.
It was seductive. KKR would present buyouts as this win-win situation. You get to cash out, you keep control of your company, and potentially make a fortune.
All by embracing a ton of debt.
Hey, when you're in a crisis, it sounds pretty tempting. Who wouldn't at least consider it?
So it sounds like KKR wasn't just playing checkers with these deals. They were playing high-stakes chess. Like, they knew how to manipulate the whole board.
Yeah.
But this whole debt-fueled environment, this wasn't solely their creation, was it?
No, absolutely not. KKR, they didn't invent this environment. They were just masters at exploiting it. So you got to remember, the generation that lived through the Depression, they were starting to retire. And a new breed of executive, they were replacing them. Ones who saw leverage not as this scary thing, but as a tool.
Interesting. So this new generation, they saw it as a competitive edge. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And this shift was partly fueled by the whole rise of supply-side economics, this idea that tax cuts for businesses would, trickle down and help everyone.
Right.
So KKR, they saw an opportunity in this changing tide, this chance to, ride this wave of debt to even greater success. But it wasn't just about going after struggling companies like Bill Jones and Born Clay. They went after the giants, too. This environment, it emboldened them to pursue even the most conservative companies out there.
So who comes to mind?
Think Gerald Saltarelli and Hudale Industries.
Hudale Industries. Okay.
Yeah.
What's their story?
So Saltarelli, he was the chairman of Hudale, a Fortune 500 company. He was like the opposite of a risk taker, financially conservative. He'd seen the Depression firsthand.
Right.
His company, they were rolling in cash, never touched debt. You'd think they'd be immune to KKR, wouldn't you?
You would think so. What happened?
Well, KKR, with Kravis leading the charge, they somehow managed to pull off this buyout of Hudale. And it was for a ridiculous amount of money, almost entirely borrowed.
Wow. So, I mean, it's like that saying, right? If you owe the bank $1 million, that's your problem. If you owe them $1 billion, that's the bank's problem.
Right.
But seriously, how did KKR actually convince these lenders to back such a risky move? I mean, Hudale was like the epitome of conservative business.
It was a perfect storm of factors. I mean, like we were talking about, debt was becoming more accepted, right? Leverage, it was seen as the key to like really rapid growth. But KKR, they were also just incredibly good at building relationships with these bankers.
So it's all about who you know.
Yeah, in a way, it was. You've got George Roberts. He's the finance whiz over at KKR. This guy, he was a master at understanding the psychology of lending, He wouldn't just approach these bankers with a business proposition. He'd make them feel like they were like part of this exclusive club or something.
So he flipped the script, made it a privilege to lend to KKR.
Exactly. But there's this other element that often gets overlooked in these buyouts, and it's a big one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
Taxes.
Ah, okay. Time for a little Econ 101 refresher. How did taxes play into all of this?
All right, so say a company makes $10 million in profit, right?
Okay.
If they pay dividends to their stockholders, they might end up paying like $3 million in taxes on that.
Makes sense.
But if they take on massive debt instead, they could deduct the interest payments on that debt, which would then significantly reduce their tax burden.
Wow. So suddenly high debt isn't just acceptable, it's actually advantageous. Let's
Exactly.
talk about manipulating the system. So, I mean, while all this is happening, the champagne's flowing for KKR, guys like Bill Jones see a chance to cash out. What's going on back on the ground at these companies, like Bourne Clay, for example? Like,
Yeah.
they're the ones who end up shouldering all this debt, right?
Right. And that's the darker side of all of this. Someone had to pay for those, those lavish hotels and those multi-million-dollar deals.
Right.
And that pressure, it often trickled down to the employees.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about regular people, right?
Yeah, regular people. Remember Bill Jones's dilemma?
Yeah.
Now multiply that by like thousands of companies across the country.
Yeah. It's a lot. And the sources we looked at, they paint a pretty grim picture.
Yeah.
This wasn't just like numbers on a balance sheet, right? This was people's lives.
Mm.
We're talking cost-cutting measures, layoffs, factories shutting down, all to service this mountain of debt.
And it wasn't just contained to like one specific company or industry. It was everywhere. You look
Yeah.
at workers at companies like Safeway, the grocery store chain, Owens, Illinois, the glass manufacturer.
Wow, those are big names.
Huge. And they faced some serious hardship as a result of these buyouts.
Man, it really makes you think, like, who actually benefits from these deals? It seems like it's the CEOs, maybe a select few at the top. They're the ones reaping the rewards while everyone else is left holding the bag.
Yeah.
It's like this classic case of the winners and losers, right? And the story of KKR, their whole approach, I mean, this is just the beginning, this wave of leveraged buyouts, it didn't just disappear. It transformed, like, the entire financial landscape.
Totally. I mean, their tactics, that whole idea of using tons of debt, it became the blueprint for like decades of these corporate deals. And it's a legacy that we're still dealing with even today,
For sure. Okay, so let's step back for a second, recap a bit, because it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
We saw how KKR, they used this combination of, like, charisma and financial engineering, almost like they were playing chess.
Right. Absolutely.
To gain the trust of these CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
they understood how Wall Street worked. Like, they knew that debt had become, well, acceptable.
Mm.
And they weren't afraid to, like, really use that to their advantage.
Yeah.
But we saw how those deals, often they came at a pretty steep cost. And we're not just talking about dollars and cents here, but a real human cost for a lot of everyday workers.
And we can't forget about those tax incentives, right?
Oh, right.
That was huge. That's a big part of what made this whole strategy possible, made taking on all that debt not just acceptable, but like actually advantageous.
Right. Wild, like a huge magic trick. And nobody even noticed the sleight of hand. We've been talking about this a while now, but it's still crazy to me how they took debt, something that's usually seen as a bad thing, and turned it into this tool for making huge profits.
Well, that's the thing about finance, isn't it? I mean, it makes you question, even now, are we still dealing with the fallout from the shift towards using so much debt?
That's the million-dollar question right there.
Yeah.
What is the right amount of debt, not just for businesses, but for society? Like, how do we balance making money with, the well-being of everyone else? These decisions made in boardrooms, they don't just impact the bottom line, they have this ripple effect.
Totally. And that's what's so important to remember about these stories, about KKR, about the whole buyout boom. Finance, it isn't just about numbers. It's about power, about the choices people make and how those choices affect all of us.
Big time. So as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
Think about debt, not just in your own life, but in the world around you. Ask yourself, who benefits from it? Who pays the price? The answers might surprise you.
That's great advice. And that's it for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another look at the forces shaping our world.